morning. I would like to call this joint Senate Finance and Assembly Ways and Means Committee to order, and I would like to welcome everyone joining us here in Carson City, Las Vegas, and online. My name is Marilyn Dondero-Loop, and I will be chairing the joint meeting this morning, and would the secretary please call the roll?
Assemblymember Anderson. Assemblymember Backus. Assemblymember Brown-May. Assemblymember Dickman. Assemblymember Hafen. Assemblymember Hibbets. Assemblymember Howdegi. Assemblymember Koenig. Assemblymember Mosca. Assemblymember O'Neill. Assemblymember Torres Fawcett. Assemblymember Watts. Assemblymember Yeager. Senator Buck. Senator Cannizzaro. Senator Neal. Senator Wen. Senator Stone. Senator Taylor. Senator Titus. Assemblymember Monroe Moreno. Chair Dondero-Loop.
And I am here. Please mark Assemblymember Torres Fawcett absent excused, and mark the others present as they arrive. We have some people in and out to do bills this morning. So thank you very much. And before we move on to today's closing, of course, I would like to remind everyone to mute your electronic devices that you have. And if you are providing testimony, please state and spell your name for the record, and please give a card to the committee secretary as it helps with our record keeping. Lastly, there will be a public comment period at the end of today's meeting. We have a very full agenda and lots of subcommittee reports. I will be taking things out of order just to let you know up front. Also, it is also possible if we do not get through all of these subcommittee reports today, we may recess and come back at a later time. So with that, we will we are going to open with our State Public Works Division under the Department of Administration. We will start with that subcommittee closing first. Thank you. Okay, I think everyone has their copies. Good morning, Ms. Waller, and thank you for everything you've been working on, and all the staff for all their hard work. I know that they worked all weekend, and are continuing that. So thank you very much. And please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Julie Waller with the Fiscal Analysis Division, and this morning I'll be walking the committee through the joint subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education CIP closing report for the State Public Works Division of the Department of Administration. The Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education CIP has completed its review of the State Public Works Division's budget accounts for the 25-27 biennium. The closing recommendations of the subcommittee result in a general fund decrease of $338,177 in fiscal year 2026 and $276,934 in fiscal year 2027 compared to the governor's recommendations. The following describes the more significant recommendations of the joint subcommittee. For the Buildings and Grounds budget count 1349, the subcommittee concurred with the governor's recommendation for reductions of reserved rent revenues totaling $1.7 million over the 25-27 biennium, of which $574,780 is recommended one-time funding for building repair and renovation projects for state-owned buildings statewide, and $1.1 million is recommended ongoing funding for building and grounds preventative maintenance, repair, and emergency service contracts. The subcommittee also recommended approving $1.8 million over the 25-27 biennium, included in the base budget as one-time funding for building repair and renovation projects. The subcommittee further recommended approval of the remainder of the Buildings and Grounds budget account as recommended by the governor. The subcommittee recommends closing the following Department of Administration, State Public Works Division budget accounts as recommended in the executive budget with minor technical adjustments by fiscal staff. State Public Works Division budget account 1540, the administration budget. State Public Works Division Engineering and Planning budget account 1562. State Public Works Division Facility Condition Analysis budget account 1560. And State Public Works Division budget account 1366 for the Marlette Lake. The subcommittee recommended approving authority for fiscal staff to make technical adjustments throughout the division's budget accounts as necessary. And that concludes the subcommittee report, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Committee, are there any questions on this? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve the Department of Administration's State Public Works Division's closing report as stated by staff, and also authorize fiscal staff to make technical adjustments throughout the division's budget accounts as necessary.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Monroe Moreno, second by Senator Nguyen. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Waller. All right, next on the agenda, we will go to the legislative branch, the Capital Improvement Program. Mr. Leiser, you're off the paper duty, and you get to come to the table. Thank you. All right, go ahead, Mr. Leiser. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Buenos dias. Good morning. My name is...
Do you have a song with that?
Not this morning. My name is Brody Leiser. I'm with the Fiscal Analysis Division of the Legislative Council Bureau, and I will be presenting the Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education CIP's closing report for the Legislative Council Bureau, capital improvement projects, and one-time appropriations. The Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education CIP has completed its review of the Legislative Council Bureau's requested capital improvement projects and one-time general fund appropriations and has made the following recommendations for the 2025 to 27 biennium. The subcommittee recommended general fund appropriations of $33.9 million and general obligation bond funding of $191.9 million for total funding of $225.7 million to support capital improvement projects for critical infrastructure renovations to the Legislative Building and State Printing Office, construction of a new office building to replace the Sedway office building, as well as a new parking structure, and property acquisition and improvements for the Carson City campus. The subcommittee also recommended approval of one-time general fund appropriations of $8.1 million for information technology projects and equipment, and for dues and registration costs for national organizations, and that the appropriation be included in the 2025 Appropriations Act. And Madam Chair, that concludes the report from the subcommittee.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion on this particular item? Senator Titus?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly appreciate all the LCB has done and showing us and taking us tours of this building and knowing that there needs to be some improvement in this building. However, I'm not okay with some of the other stuff, and so I'll be a no on this. Thank you.
Any additional comments or discussion? All right, with that, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve the joint subcommittee closing report for the LCB capital improvement projects and one-time appropriations.
Thank you very much. And second by Senator Nguyen. Any further discussion on this motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Nays, if you would raise your hand. So we have a nay from Senator Titus, Senator Buck, Assemblymember Hibbets, Assemblymember Dickman, Assemblymember O'Neill. Is that it? Did I get everybody? Okay, thank you. All right, motion passes. And with that, thank you very much, Mr. Leiser. And we will now go on to the rest of the Department of Administration. And we will do we'll start with the main Department of Administration. Good morning. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Damian Meeks, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division, for the record. I'll be presenting the Joint Subcommittee on General Government Closing Report for the Department of Administration. The Joint Subcommittee on General Government has completed its review of the Department of Administration budget accounts for the 2025-27 biennium. The subcommittee's closing recommendations resulted in an increase in general fund appropriations of $13,915 in fiscal year 2026 and $6,272 in fiscal year 2027 when compared to the governor's recommended budget. The following comments describe the more significant recommendations of the subcommittee. For the Merit Award Board Budget Account 1345, the subcommittee recommended not approving the governor's recommendation to discontinue funding for the Merit Award Program and instead recommended approving general fund appropriations of $3,000 for Merit Award Board administration costs and $5,000 for program awards over the 2025-27 biennium. For the Administrative Services Budget Account 1371, the subcommittee recommended approval of administrative charges totaling $181,503 over the 2025-27 biennium for one new supervisory accountant technician position to address the division's accounting section workload. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended approval of administrative charges totaling $303,942 over the 2025-27 biennium for two new administrative assistant positions to address the workload in the division's administrative section. The subcommittee further recommended approval of Budget Amendment A255211-371 to adjust administrative charge revenue, eliminate the recommendation for one new management analyst position, and add contract expenditures for internal service fund rate consulting services funded with administrative charges of $191,090 over the 2025-27 biennium. For the Fleet Services Budget Account 1354, to address an increase in the workload due to a growing number of fleet vehicles, the subcommittee recommended approval of reserve reductions totaling $152,658 over the 2025-27 biennium for one new fleet specialist position in the Carson City office. The subcommittee further recommended approval of reserve reductions of $121,898 over the 2025-27 biennium for one new fleet service worker position in the Las Vegas office to address maintenance workload needs. For the Hearings and Appeals Division Budget Account 1015, the subcommittee recommended approval of an allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund totaling $387,804 over the 2025-27 biennium for continued funding for one unclassified appeals officer position that was established in fiscal year 2024 to address the existing and projected workload of hearings and appeals cases. For the Agency HR Services Budget Account 1360, the subcommittee recommended approval of reserve reductions of $528,736 over the 2025-27 biennium to convert two intermittent personnel technician positions and one intermittent personnel analyst position to full-time permanent positions to support workload demands and ongoing agency operations. For the Human Resource Management Budget Account 1363, the subcommittee recommended approval of reserve reductions of $180,946 over the 2025-27 biennium for one new training officer position to support the Office of Employee Development Training Programs. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended approval of reserve reductions of $304,012 over the 2025-27 biennium for two new accountant technician positions to address workload associated with payroll transactions. The subcommittee also recommended approval of reserve reductions of $602,887 over the 2025-27 biennium to convert one intermittent personnel technician position and two intermittent personnel analyst positions to full-time permanent positions to support human resource workload demands and ongoing agency operations. Finally, the subcommittee recommended approval to transfer three equal employment opportunity officer positions, one each, from the Department of Public Safety Director's Office, the Nevada Department of Transportation, and the Department of Corrections Director's Office budget accounts to the Division of Human Resource Management budget account, and funding these positions with reserve reductions totaling $770,438 over the 2025-27 biennium. The subcommittee recommended closing the following Department of Administration budget accounts as recommended by the governor with or without technical adjustments, and provided authority for fiscal staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary. Director's Office Budget Account 1337, Juvenile and Family Court Judges Budget Account 1302, Deferred Compensation Committee Budget Account 1017, Fleet Services Capital Purchase Budget Account 1356, Human Resource Management Unemployment Compensation Budget Account 1339, Mail Services Budget Account 1346, Mail Services Equipment Budget Account 1347, NSLA State Library Budget Account 2891, NSLA Archives and Public Records Budget Account 1052, NSLA Library Cooperative Budget Account 2895, NSLA IPS Equipment and Software Budget Account 1053, Purchasing Budget Account 1358, Federal Surplus Property Program Budget Account 1367, and Insurance and Loss Prevention Budget Account 1352. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. And with that, I will ask if there's any questions. Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve the Joint Subcommittee on General Government closing report for the Department of Administration and give our fiscal staff authority to make any other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you so much. A motion by Assemblymember Monroe Moreno, a second by Senator Wynn. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much. And we will move on to the capital sorry, wait a minute. We will next do the Nevada System of Higher Education. Good morning, Ms. Mangoba. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. J. Marie Mangoba for the record, and I'm here to present the subcommittee closing report for the Nevada System of Higher Education. On May 2nd, 2025, the Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education CIP completed its review of the Nevada System of Higher Education budget recommendations in the executive budget for the 2025-27 biennium. The subcommittee's actions resulted in a decrease of general fund appropriations of $40.1 million in fiscal year 26 and $44.3 million in fiscal year 27. The subcommittee approved the following closing actions. Starting with the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, commonly known as WICHE, the subcommittee recommended to approve total funding of $2.3 million over the 2025-27 biennium for support of the Professional Student Exchange Program, the Health Professional Education Program, and the Psychology Internship Program for the WICHE Loans and Stipends budget account. The subcommittee further recommended to issue a letter of intent allowing WICHE to reallocate student slots between fields to meet student demand, to instruct WICHE to report to the IFC within 30 days any such reallocations, and to include language in the Authorizations Act to allow WICHE to balance forward unexpended fee revenues received after May 15th of each year to support the Health Professional Education Program. The subcommittee recommended the WICHE administration budget be closed as recommended by the governor. Regarding the existing higher education funding formula components for instructional budgets, the subcommittee recommended approval of additional general fund appropriations of $22.8 million in each fiscal year of the 2025-27 biennium, resulting from a net system-wide increase in weighted student credit hours through the caseload adjustments based on the fiscal year 25 calculated weighted student credit hour value of $173.29. The subcommittee further recommended approving budget amendments submitted by the Governor's Office of Finance to remove additional general fund appropriations of $4.7 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium, originally recommended in Decision Unit M204 to increase the weighted student credit hour value used or for the caseload adjustments from $173.29 to $208.99. Regarding the small institution factor, the subcommittee recommended adopting the budget policy changes recommended by the governor to increase the small institution factor threshold from 100,000 to 125,000 weighted student credit hours and to apply the Higher Education Price Index inflationary factor on an ongoing basis to the annual weighted student credit hour value used for the small institution factor. As a result, the subcommittee recommended total general fund appropriations of $569,428 for Western Nevada College and $2.1 million for Great Basin College over the 2025-27 biennium. The subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations totaling $12.3 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium for the University of Nevada, Reno and University of Nevada, Las Vegas to fund research space operations and maintenance funding, inclusive of new general fund appropriations of $1 million in each year to support additional research space identified by UNR. Lastly, the subcommittee recommended approving the elimination of the performance funding pool set aside as recommended by the governor. Regarding the general fund allocation change for the cost of living salary increase approved by the 2023 legislature, the subcommittee recommended approving budget amendments as recommended by the governor to remove additional general fund appropriations of $28.7 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium, originally recommended in Decision Unit E685 to support salary-related expenditures over the 2025-27 biennium, resulting from the cost of living salary increases approved by the Board of Regents for professional staff and by the 2023 legislature for classified staff. Regarding the phase-in of recommended changes to the higher education funding formula, the subcommittee recommended budgeting using the base maintenance and enhancement methodology and did not approve Decision Unit E146 as recommended by the governor to phase in the implementation of the new higher education funding formula distribution methodology. As the governor's recommendation included a hold harmless provision for UNLV and UNR from budgetary reductions that would have otherwise been realized from a redistribution of funds from the R1 universities to the other 5 instructional formula budgets, the subcommittee's recommendation resulted in general fund reductions of $12.9 million compared to the executive budget as submitted. The subcommittee recommended approval of student-derived non-general fund revenues for the 7 formula instructional institutions, 4 professional schools, and the prison education budget as recommended by the governor for the 2025-27 biennium. The subcommittee recommended to continue the existing policy initially adopted by the 2013 legislature that non-general fund revenues, which include registration fees, non-resident tuition, and miscellaneous student fees, should not be used to offset the amount of general fund appropriations that would otherwise be budgeted. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended inclusion of language in the 2025 Authorizations Act that would allow NSHE to balance forward unexpended non-general fund revenues to the next fiscal year, as well as authorization to expend increases in student-derived revenues without IFC approval, but with required reporting to the IFC. Related to the compensation for state-funded positions, the subcommittee recommended authority for fiscal staff to make technical adjustments in each fiscal year of the 2025-27 biennium to the fringe benefits in the M300 decision unit for budget accounts that have generic line item adjustments in the personnel category and therefore do not accurately budget for the positions identified within the executive budget, which would reduce general fund appropriations by $1.1 million in fiscal year 26 and $881,707 in fiscal year 27, and to provide staff with authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary. The subcommittee further recommended issuing a letter of intent to instruct NSHE to provide a report to the IFC, specifically identifying new positions approved and eliminated by the Board of Regents compared to the positions approved in the budget by the 2025 legislature for fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27, and to instruct NSHE to clearly denote positions approved, eliminated, and held vacant by the Board of Regents as compared to the positions approved in the budget by the 2025 legislature when preparing for the 2027-29 budget. The letter of intent would further instruct NSHE to not continue to utilize a generic line item within the personnel expenditure category, nor to utilize the manual salary and grade overrides for classified positions when building its requested base budget for the 2027-29 biennium. Related to the funding for the non-formula professional school and WICHE administration budgets, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommended 2025-27 biennium funding levels for 16 NSHE non-formula state-supported operating budgets in the executive budget, inclusive of a technical adjustment to remove general fund appropriations of $25,000 in each fiscal year of the 2025-27 biennium within the Education for Dependent Children budget account, as the account has a sufficient balance to meet projected expenditures over the upcoming biennium. The subcommittee further recommended approval of the governor's recommended 2025-27 biennium funding levels for the UNR School of Medicine, the UNLV Kirk Kerkorian School of Medicine, the UNLV William S. Boyd School of Law, and UNLV School of Dental Medicine and the Desert Research Institute. The subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $11.9 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium for inflationary increase on utilities statewide. Regarding the academic support payments for UNR School of Medicine, the subcommittee recommended to approve academic support payments of $27.4 million in fiscal year 26 and $28.9 million in fiscal year 27 for the UNR School of Medicine budget, and recommended inclusion of language in the 2025 Authorizations Act to allow NSHE to expend any additional academic support payments beyond the budgeted amounts, to not be required to revert an amount of general fund appropriations equal to the academic support payments received beyond budgeted authority, and to allow any remaining unexpended academic support payments to balance forward to the next fiscal year for authorized purposes in the UNR School of Medicine budget account. Lastly, the subcommittee recommended to approve authorization for fiscal staff to make technical adjustments as necessary. And Madam Chair, that concludes my report for the Nevada System of Higher Education.
Thank you so much. Any questions on that budget? All right, seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve the Joint Subcommittee on K-12 and Higher Education CIP closing report for the Nevada System of Higher Education, and also authorize our fiscal staff to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Monroe Moreno, second by Senator Wynn. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. I'm sorry. Assemblymember Hibbets is a nay. Any additional nays? Okay, thank you very much. Motion passes, and we will move. Thank you very much, Ms. Mangoba, and we will move on to the Department of Business and Industry. Okay, good morning. Great to see you, and we have several trees that we killed up here, so we'll let you go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, members of the committee. Madison Ryan, LCB Fiscal for the record. I will be presenting the Joint Subcommittee on General Government closing report for the Department of Business and Industry. The Joint Subcommittee on General Government completed its review of the budget accounts for the Department of Business and Industry for the 2025-27 biennium. The closing recommendations of the subcommittee have resulted in a decrease of general fund appropriations of $176,421 in fiscal year 2026 and $109,671 in fiscal year 2027 when compared to the governor's recommended budget. The closing recommendations of the subcommittee have also resulted in a decrease of highway fund appropriations of $30,246 in fiscal year 2026 and $31,822 in fiscal year 2027, and the following describes the more significant recommendations of the subcommittee. For the Business and Industry Administration Budget Account 4681, although the governor recommended 6 new positions to establish a new human resources unit for the department, the subcommittee recommended approving 3 new positions to establish the unit, inclusive of 1 new personnel technician position, 1 new personnel analyst position, and 1 new personnel officer position, funded with cost allocation reimbursements of $243,545 in fiscal year 2026 and $302,699 in fiscal year 2027. The subcommittee recommended approval of cost allocation reimbursements for 4 new IT positions, funded with cost allocation reimbursements of $375,574 in fiscal year 2026 and $471,304 in fiscal year 2027. The subcommittee further recommended approval to centralize department IT staff within the Business and Industry Administration budget account, which includes the transfer of 4 IT positions from the Insurance Regulation budget account, the Nevada Transportation Authority budget account, the Housing Division budget account, and the Division of Industrial Relations budget account, and to change the funding source for these positions to cost allocation reimbursements totaling $652,952 in fiscal year 2026 and $657,148 in fiscal year 2027. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended approval of the elimination of cost allocation reimbursements of $220,071 in fiscal year 2026 and $259,653 in fiscal year 2027 for 1 unclassified deputy director position and associated operating costs, as recommended in Budget Amendment A25-485-4681. The subcommittee recommended approval of 1 new public information officer position, 1 new legal research assistant position, and associated operating costs, funded with cost allocation reimbursements of $175,894 in fiscal year 2026 and $219,881 in fiscal year 2027. The subcommittee did not recommend approval of a 2nd new public information officer position and associated operating costs as recommended by the governor. The subcommittee further recommended not approving the governor's recommendation for 4 new positions for the Fiscal Services Unit, and instead recommended approval of 3 new positions for the unit. This recommendation includes 2 new accounting assistant positions, 1 new management analyst position, and associated operating costs, funded with cost allocation reimbursements of $209,826 in fiscal year 2026 and $260,098 in fiscal year 2027. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for cost allocation reimbursements of $481,748 in fiscal year 2026 and $864,779 in fiscal year 2027 to fund a contract with the Department of Public Safety to provide security services at the department's office locations in Las Vegas. To fund technology investments for the department's fiscal services and consumer affairs units, the subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $73,167 and cost allocation reimbursements of $155,377 in fiscal year 2026, and general fund appropriations of $47,762 and cost allocation reimbursements of $28,657 in fiscal year 2027 as recommended by the governor. The subcommittee did not recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to revise the director's office cost allocation methodology to a cost allocation methodology based on the position count in each budget account, but rather recommended approval of a hybrid cost allocation methodology that utilizes both the position count for HR, payroll, IT, and director level costs, as well as a financial document counts for fiscal services to determine the portion of the director's office cost allocation for each budget account within the department. For the Insurance Regulation Budget Account 3813, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for 1 new business process analyst position, 1 new management analyst position, 1 new unclassified legal researcher position, and associated costs to improve the daily functions and activities of the agency, funded with reserve reductions of $273,379 in fiscal year 2026 and $339,862 in fiscal year 2027. The subcommittee also recommended approval of reserve reductions of $79,514 in fiscal year 2026 and $99,246 in fiscal year 2027 for one new compliance investigator position and associated costs, as recommended by the governor to address an increase in workload in the division's consumer services section. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended not approving the governor's recommendation for reserve reductions of $459,388 over the 2025-27 biennium for one new unclassified general counsel position and associated costs to address an increase in legal issues the division has experienced in recent fiscal years. The captive insurer's budget account 3818, to address declining reserve levels and potential insolvency for the captive insurer's budget account, the subcommittee recommended approval of merging the captive insurer's budget account with the insurance regulation budget account, and also recommended the full money committee's request a bill draft to amend Chapter 694C of the Nevada Revised Statutes to effectuate this merger. The subcommittee also recommended issuing a letter of intent that instructs the agency to submit to the Interim Finance Committee semi-annual updates on the merger and the program's solvency status during the 2025-26 interim. For the Division of Industrial Relations, Budget Account 4680, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for one new administrative assistant position, two new management analyst positions, and associated costs to streamline the workers' compensation assessment process, funded with allocations from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund of $232,622 in fiscal year 2026 and $289,673 in fiscal year 2027. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for one new business process analyst position and associated costs to assist with the division's claims and regulatory data system, funded with allocations from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund of $78,768 in fiscal year 2026 and $98,475 in fiscal year 2027. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for four new compliance audit investigator positions and associated costs for the division's employer compliance unit, funded with allocations from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund of $166,199 in fiscal year 2026 and $404,382 in fiscal year 2027. Finally, the subcommittee recommended approval of an allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund of $349,785 in fiscal year 2026 to fund contract costs to conduct a study to compare reimbursement rates for medical services provided to injured workers as recommended by the governor. For the Occupational Safety and Health Enforcement, Budget Account 4682, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for four new administrative assistant positions, 14 new industrial hygienist positions, and associated costs to increase the number of inspections to be completed each year and to provide additional administrative support, funded with allocations from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund of $901,497 in fiscal year 2026 and $2.2 million in fiscal year 2027. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for two new safety specialist boiler positions and associated costs to address an increase in boilers and pressure vessels that require inspection, funded with allocations from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund of $189,672 in fiscal year 2026 and $243,462 in fiscal year 2027. The subcommittee did not recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for allocations from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund of $69,083 in fiscal year 2026 and $83,998 in fiscal year 2027 for one new administrative assistant position and associated costs to supervise existing administrative assistant positions in the mechanical compliance section. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended approval for two new safety specialist elevator positions and associated costs to address an increase in the number of elevators requiring inspection, funded with allocations from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund of $98,848 in fiscal year 2026 and $249,854 in fiscal year 2027. Finally, the subcommittee recommended approval of allocations from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund of $1.4 million in fiscal year 2026 and $264,600 in fiscal year 2027, inclusive of technical adjustments to design, implement, and maintain a new database system as recommended by the governor. For the Safety Consultation and Training, Budget Account 4685, the subcommittee recommended not approving the governor's recommendation for allocations from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund of $110,227 in fiscal year 2026 and $136,940 in fiscal year 2027 for one new safety supervisor consultation position and associated costs to supervise the creation of an industrial hygiene unit within the Safety Consultation and Training section. For the Boards and Commissions budget, Budget Account 4679, To establish the Boards and Commissions budget account, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer in one existing deputy director position from the Business and Industry Administration budget account, currently funded with general fund appropriations of $218,463 in fiscal year 2026 and $218,004 in fiscal year 2027, inclusive of associated costs. The subcommittee further recommended changing the funding source for the deputy director position from general fund appropriations to cost allocation reimbursements of $218,004 in fiscal year 2027, as recommended in Budget Amendment A25-345-4679, contingent upon approval of Senate Bill 78 of the 83rd Legislative Session or other enabling legislation that would allow for the Office of Nevada Boards, Commissions, and Council Standards to collect fees from a board, commission, council, or similar body to which services are provided. The subcommittee further recommended approval of one new management analyst position funded with a general fund appropriation of $99,371 in fiscal year 2026 and cost allocation reimbursements of $112,928 in fiscal year 2027, as recommended in Budget Amendment A25-345-4679, inclusive of technical adjustments and contingent upon approval of Senate Bill 78 or other enabling legislation that would allow for the office to collect fees from a board, commission, council, or similar body to which services are provided. The subcommittee did not recommend approval of 14 new positions as recommended in Budget Amendment A25-345-4679, but instead recommended approval of 9 new positions funded with cost allocation reimbursements, inclusive of 7 new positions beginning in fiscal year 2026, to provide the office with resources to oversee all professional and occupational licensing boards in the state as required in our NRS, including 1 new Administrative Assistant 3 position, 1 new Administrative Assistant 4 position, 1 new Compliance Audit Investigator 2 position, 1 new Legal Research Assistant 1 position, 1 new Chief Compliance Audit Investigator position, 1 new Administrative Services Officer 3 position, and 1 new Unclassified Senior Attorney position, and 2 new positions beginning July 1, 2026, inclusive of 1 new Management Analyst 1 position and 1 new Auditor 3 position, contingent upon approval of Senate Bill 78 or other enabling legislation that would allow for the office to collect fees from a board, commission, council, or similar body to which services are provided. Additionally, the subcommittee did not recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for cost allocation reimbursements of $5.2 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium to fund annual operating and contract costs as recommended in Budget Amendment A25-345-4679. The subcommittee recommended issuing a letter of intent that instructs the office to submit to the Interim Finance Committee semi-annual updates on the progress of implementing NRS 232-8415 and the oversight that would be provided to the boards and commissions over the 2025-27 biennium. The subcommittee recommended not approving 55 new positions as reflected in Budget Amendment A25-357-4679, inclusive of cost allocation reimbursements of $4.1 million in fiscal year 2026 and $7.1 million in fiscal year 2027 to implement the proposed new changes and requirements of the office as outlined in Senate Bill 78. Finally, the subcommittee recommended approval of adding the Director's Office cost allocation expenses in fiscal year 2026 and fiscal year 2027, resulting from the number of positions recommended from the subcommittee for the Boards and Commissions budget account, funded with cost allocation reimbursements from the Boards and Commissions, as recommended in Budget Amendments A25-345-4679 and A25-357-4679, with authority for fiscal staff to make adjustments consistent with the cost allocation methodology approved by the subcommittee in the Business and Industry Administration budget account and consistent with the subcommittee's recommendations for the number of positions for the Boards and Commissions budget account. The Housing Division, Budget Account 3841, the subcommittee recommended approving reserve reductions of $295,034 in fiscal year 2026 and $338,473 in fiscal year 2027 for 1 new auditor position, 1 new accountant position, and 1 new management analyst position, along with associated costs to address an increase in workload related to the division's federal funding and housing initiatives. The subcommittee further recommended an accelerated start date for the management analyst position of July 1, 2025, rather than July 1, 2026, as recommended by the governor. The Home Means Nevada Initiative, Budget Account 3840, to continue funding the Home Means Nevada Initiative through December 31st, 2026, the subcommittee recommended approval of American Rescue Plan Act Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds of $155.7 million in fiscal year 2026 and $71.1 million in fiscal year 2027, as recommended by the governor. For Windsor Park, budget account 3837, to continue funding the Windsor Park relocation and rehabilitation project in the 2025-27 biennium, the subcommittee recommended approval of ARPA coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds of $13.6 million in fiscal year 2026 and $435,000 in fiscal year 2027, based on the division's expenditure projections. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended issuing a letter of intent requiring the Housing Division to provide quarterly reports to the Interim Finance Committee concerning the progress of the Windsor Park relocation and rehabilitation project over the 2025-27 biennium. For the supportive housing development, budget account 3836, the subcommittee recommended approval of expenditure authority of $7.6 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium to implement the supportive housing grant program to reduce homelessness and inappropriate institutionalization and evaluate the effectiveness of intervention in the state. For the Real Estate Administration, budget account 3823, the subcommittee recommended approval of budget amendment A25-469-3823 to eliminate the transfer of one administrative assistant position and associated operating costs from the Common Interest Communities budget account to the Real Estate Administration budget account, and to eliminate the recommended change in funding source for this position from reserves to general fund appropriations totaling $195,236 over the 2025-27 biennium. The Real Estate Recovery Account, budget account 3827, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer associated revenue and expenses totaling $1 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium to the Real Estate Education and Research budget account and eliminate the Real Estate Recovery budget account. The subcommittee also recommended revising the name of the current Real Estate Education and Research budget account as the Real Estate Education, Research, and Recovery Fund to reflect this change and align with the name provided under Chapter 645 of NRS. The Taxi Cab Authority, budget account 4130. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to eliminate 2 vacant compliance enforcement investigator positions, which would increase reserves by $686,310 over the 2025-27 biennium to help address solvency concerns in the Taxi Cab Authority budget account. The subcommittee also recommended approval of Budget Amendment A25-467-4130, which would eliminate 1 additional vacant supervisory compliance enforcement investigator position and training expenses, reduce trip charge revenue and technology fee revenue based on revised trip projections of 13.6 million trips in fiscal year 2026 and 13.7 million in fiscal year 2027, reduce uniform expenses by $7,780 in each year of the 2025-27 biennium, with a corresponding reduction in reserves totaling $67,232 in fiscal year 2026 and $199,385 in fiscal year 2027. The subcommittee further recommended eliminating 1 vacant administrative assistant position and reducing the transfer to the Aging and Disability Services Division for the Taxi Assistance Program to $200,000 in each year of the 2025-27 biennium to increase reserves by $440,435 over the biennium, which would provide projected reserve levels of 161 days in fiscal year 2026 and 85 days in fiscal year 2027, inclusive of operating and technology reserves combined, to help address solvency concerns in this budget account. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended issuing a letter of intent that instructs the agency to submit to the Interim Finance Committee semi-annual updates on the agency's budget solvency status and its long-term budget solvency plan, inclusive of analyzing fee changes and a study of a potential merger of the Taxi Cab Authority and the Nevada Transportation Authority during the 2025-26 interim. Finally, the subcommittee recommended approval of Budget Amendment A25-467-4130 to eliminate service fees for fingerprinting services totaling $77,160 in each year of the 2025-27 biennium, with a commensurate reduction to reserves in each year of the 2025-27 biennium. The Nevada Transportation Authority, budget account 3922. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to continue funding for the modernization of the agency's driver permit database, funded with highway fund appropriations of $165,482 in fiscal year 2026 and $171,984 in fiscal year 2027. The Labor Commissioner, budget account 3900, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to add 4 new positions and associated operating costs to establish a public works compliance team, funded with general fund appropriations of $151,500 in fiscal year 2026 and $369,324 in fiscal year 2027. The subcommittee also recommended issuing a letter of intent that instructs the office to submit to the Interim Finance Committee annual updates on the workload measures, performance indicators, and updated resolution metrics on the 90-day resolution rate for public works claims, following the establishment of a public works compliance team. The subcommittee further recommended approval of a general fund appropriation of $81,548 in fiscal year 2027 for one new administrative assistant position and associated operating costs, beginning July 1, 2026, to provide support to the state apprenticeship program. The Division of Financial Institutions, Budget Account 3835. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for one new unclassified deputy division administrator position to serve as a deputy commissioner position, funded by reserve reductions of $135,366 in fiscal year 2026 and $166,426 in fiscal year 2027. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for one new IT professional position and associated operating costs, reducing reserves by $106,745 in fiscal year 2026 and $136,567 in fiscal year 2027. The subcommittee recommended approval of reserve reductions of $70,000 in each fiscal year of the 2025-27 biennium to fund a cryptocurrency monitoring software as recommended by the governor. For the Financial Institutions Investigations, Budget Account 3805, the subcommittee did not concur with the governor's recommendation to fund the implementation of a new licensing, examination, and enforcement system in the Financial Institutions Investigations budget account, but rather recommended approval of reserve reductions of $1.2 million in fiscal year 2026 and $176,000 in fiscal year 2027 in the Division of Financial Institutions budget account to fund the implementation of a new licensing, examination, and enforcement system. The subcommittee recommended closing the following Department of Business and Industry budget accounts as recommended by the governor, or as recommended by the governor with minor or technical adjustments. The Office of Business and Planning, budget account 4677, New Markets Performance Guarantee, budget account 4678, Private Activity Bonds, budget account 4683, Insurance Recovery, budget account 3821, Self-Insured Workers' Compensation, budget account 4684, Mine Safety and Training, budget account 4686, Account for Affordable Housing, budget account 3838, Special Housing Assistance, budget account 3839, Weatherization, budget account 4865, Housing Inspection and Compliance, budget account 3845, Employee Management Relations Board, budget account 1374, the Real Estate Technology Account, budget account 3822, Real Estate Education and Research, budget account 3826, Common Interest Communities, budget account 3820, Transportation Authority Admin Fines, budget account 3923, the Nevada Attorney for Injured Workers, budget account 1013, the Financial Institutions Audit, budget account 3882, the Division of Mortgage Lending, budget account 3910, the Commission on Post-Secondary Education, budget account 2666, and the subcommittee also recommended approving technical adjustments noted by staff and authorized fiscal staff to make other technical adjustments to the Department of Business and Industry budget accounts as necessary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And thank you. You get an A+ in oral reading. Thank you. All right. With that, is there any discussion? I believe Senator Canizaro? Okay. We'll take a quick recess, please. All right, we will see if we can get all folks back in seats. All eyes forward. Ms. Ryan is ready for us. Thank you very much. All right, after a quick break, I will accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve the Joint Subcommittee on General Government Closing Report on the Department of Business and Industry and authorize our fiscal staff to make any technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Monroe Moreno, and a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion? Assemblymember Backus.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I need to disclose that because of the Department of Business and Industry's report on budget closings, including accounts 5033841 and 1013837 involving the Windsor Park Environmental Justice Act. I would like to advise the committee that as an attorney, one of my clients is Community Development Program Center of Nevada, which is the developer who was awarded the project under this act. Since the independence of judgment of a reasonable person in my position with respect to this item could be materially affected by my legal employment, I am making this disclosure pursuant to Assembly Standing Rule 23 and will abstain from voting to approve the report from the subcommittee.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Ms. Ryan. All right, that takes us to the Department of Health and Human Services, and we will start with the Director's Office. All right, good morning, and please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, committee. I'm Morgan Barlow, Program Analyst for the Fiscal Analysis Division of the Legislative Council Bureau, here to present the subcommittee closing report for the Department of Health and Human Services Director's Office, which they have made the following recommendations for the 2025 to 27 biennium. The subcommittee's closing recommendations resulted in no changes in general fund appropriations, and the following comments describe the more significant recommendations of the joint subcommittee. For the Fund for a Resilient Nevada budget account, the subcommittee recommended approval of Budget Amendment A25-254-3060, totaling $14.9 million in expenditure reductions over the 2025 to 27 biennium to correct the base budget for opioid-related projects. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended approval of reserve reductions totaling $864,533 over the 2025 to 27 biennium for 4 new positions as recommended by the governor to provide administrative and financial oversight of opioid settlement funds and support compliance with program requirements. The subcommittee did not recommend approval of reserve reductions totaling $390,174 over the 2025 to 27 biennium for 2 new positions to provide programmatic support. The subcommittee provided authority for technical adjustments as necessary to align funding in this budget with decisions regarding the use of opioid funding in other budget accounts. For the administration budget account, the subcommittee recommended approving general fund appropriations totaling $160,000 in each year of the 2025 to 27 biennium to fund contractual support for program evaluation, training, project management, and data analysis as recommended by the governor. The subcommittee did not recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for transfers from the Fund for Resilient Nevada totaling $190,185 over the 2025 to 27 biennium to add one new health program specialist position to support the Nevada Office of Minority Health and Equity. For the Grants Management Unit budget account, based on updated revenue projections for the Healthy Nevada funds, the subcommittee recommended approval of Budget Amendment A25-565-3195, which reduces funding by $684,895 in fiscal year 26 and $677,517 in fiscal year 27, resulting in a total funding of $13 million over the 2025 to 27 biennium for tobacco settlement fund allocations to subgrantees. Department-wide Healthy Nevada funds decreased by 6.6% from $52.3 million approved for the 2023 to 25 biennium to $48.8 million for the 2025 to 27 biennium. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the following spending plans for the Grants Management Unit for the 2025 to 27 biennium. $3 million for Family Resource Centers, $1.7 million for Wellness for Family Services, $1.7 million for Public Health Districts, $1.6 million for the Safe Voice Program, $1.2 million for the Federally Qualified Health Center Incubator Project, $1.1 million for Respite, $960,890 for independent living grants, $559,063 for positive behavior support, and $1.1 million for administrative costs. For the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act Part C budget, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act Part C office from the Department of Health and Human Services Director's Office to the Aging and Disability Services Division, including cost allocation reductions totaling $243,490 over the 2025 to 27 biennium. For the Data Analytics budget account, the subcommittee recommended approval of $397,328 in transfer from the Division of Public and Behavioral Health over the 2025 to 27 biennium for two new health resource analyst positions to support the state unintentional drug overdose reporting system and drug overdose surveillance and epidemiology program, and efforts to centralize and improve data analytic functions within the department. The subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations totaling $192,019 over the 2025 to 27 biennium to support a funding source change for the administrative assistant position. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended issuing a letter of intent directing the agency to evaluate methodologies for a long-term sustainable cost allocation plan for the Office of Analytics based on actual work performed and to provide a report to the Interim Finance Committee by April 30th, 2026. The subcommittee recommended closing the following Department of Health and Human Services Director's Office budget as recommended in the executive budget, with technical or no adjustments. This includes the Grief Support Trust Account, the Patient Protection Commission, and the Developmental Disabilities Budget Account. For all budget accounts, the subcommittee also recommended approving technical adjustments noted by staff and authorized fiscal staff to make other technical adjustments to the Department of Health and Human Services Director's Office budgets as necessary. This concludes the subcommittee report.
Thank you very much. Any questions on this particular item? All right, seeing none, I'll take a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve the Joint Subcommittee on Human Services closing report on the Department of Health and Human Services Director's Office and provide fiscal staff the authority to make technical adjustments as needed.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Monroe Moreno, second by Senator Wynn. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much. And with that, we will go on to the Department of Aging and Disability Services. All right, thank you very much, and welcome, Ms. Ellsworth. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. Kimber Ellsworth for the record, Fiscal Analysis Division. This morning, I will walk through the Senate Committee on Finance and Assembly Committee on Ways and Means Joint Subcommittee on Human Services closing report on the Department of Health and Human Services Aging and Disability Services Division. The Joint Subcommittee on Human Services has completed its review of the budgets for the Aging and Disability Services Division of the Department of Health and Human Services. The closing recommendations of the subcommittee resulted in net decreases in general fund appropriations of $22.3 million in fiscal year 2026 and $41.8 million in fiscal year 2027 compared to the governor's recommended budget. The following comments describe the more significant recommendations the subcommittee for the 2025 to 27 biennium. For the administration budget account 3151, the subcommittee recommended approval of budget amendment A257053151, which adds general fund appropriations of $441,202 in fiscal year 2026 to fund one-time costs to maintain the agency's existing case management software application as the agency transitions to a new data system. The subcommittee did not recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for a new unclassified medical epidemiologist position to address the impacts of opioids on older adults. For the Family Preservation Program, Budget 3166, the subcommittee recommended approval of caseload adjustments for the Family Preservation Program to fund the caseload based on updated agency projections from March 2025. Additionally, due to reduced revenue projected in the Fund for a Healthy Nevada, the subcommittee recommended approval of budget amendment A255243166, which eliminates $50,586 in tobacco settlement funds transferred from the Fund for a Healthy Nevada over the 2025 to 27 biennium, with a corresponding increase in general fund appropriations to fund the projected caseload for the Family Preservation Program. The adjustments result in net general fund savings of $80,742 over the 2025 to 27 biennium. For the Developmental Services Regional Centers, budget accounts 3167, 3279, and 3280, the subcommittee recommended approval of $91.8 million, including $47.4 million general fund appropriations over the 2025 to 27 biennium to continue the existing rates paid to providers of developmental services for the supported living arrangements, family support respite, and jobs and day training programs at the Sierra Regional Center, Desert Regional Center, and Rural Regional Center, with budget amendments A256463167, A256423279, and A256443280 to fund projected service costs associated with the base caseload and caseload growth, as adjusted based on the February 2025 actual caseloads at the 3 regional centers. The recommendation results in net increased funding of $5.5 million, including $6.3 million in general fund appropriations over the 2025 to 27 biennium compared to the funding in the executive budget. The subcommittee recommended approval of $45.4 million, including $25.6 million in general fund appropriations over the 2025 to 27 biennium to fund caseload and staffing adjustments to align with caseload growth for the developmental services programs based on February 2025 actual caseloads at the regional centers, including associated service costs and 42 new positions, with budget amendments A256453167, A256413279, and A256433280 to adjust service costs, and with budget amendments A25363279 and A2536833280 to delay 29 position start dates. The recommendation results in decreased costs of $151.8 million, including $77.5 million net general fund savings over the 2025 to 27 biennium compared to the recommendation in the executive budget. The subcommittee also recommended issuing a letter of intent to the Aging and Disability Services Division and the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy to research and evaluate measures to contain caseload costs and reduce wait lists for the developmental services programs, including eligibility criteria and Medicaid waiver services, and to report to the Interim Finance Committee during the 2025 to 26 interim on their findings and any recommended policy, statutory, or program changes. Additionally, the executive budget recommends $1.6 million, including $1.1 million general fund appropriations, for 17 new developmental specialist positions across the 3 regional centers beginning in fiscal year 2027 to implement standardized functional needs assessments for individuals receiving developmental services to facilitate compliance with federal regulations. The subcommittee deferred this decision to the full committees and asked the agency to work with fiscal staff to identify an alternative for consideration that would utilize contractors or community providers rather than adding 17 new state positions to implement the standardized functional needs assessments. As background, according to Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services regulations, as a provider of services funded by Medicaid, the agency must conduct standardized assessments of the functional capacity and needs of individuals receiving developmental services. By July 9, 2027, standardized functional needs assessments must be completed for 90% of all regional centers clients receiving Medicaid waiver services, which represents more than 3,000 clients currently. The agency proposes an alternative model to conduct standardized assessments for regional centers clients that would utilize temporary contract staff with the goal of transitioning the model over time to leverage the existing community provider network to conduct the standardized assessments. Based on the February 2025 caseload numbers, as recommended by the subcommittee, the agency estimates that 15 temporary contract staff would be needed beginning July 1st, 2026, for total funding of $1.3 million, including $877,292 in general fund appropriations in fiscal year 2027 to complete the standardized assessments for at least 90% of clients receiving Medicaid waiver services by the July 2027 deadline. Rather than adding new positions, this alternative would enable the agency to complete the required assessments and provides general fund savings of $238,253 compared to the recommendations in the executive budget. If this alternative is approved, the committees may wish to add the implementation of the standardized functional needs assessments to the previously noted letter of intent to report during the interim on findings and recommendations for building community capacity and transitioning the model to leverage the existing provider network. Do the committees wish to approve total funding of $1.3 million, including $877,292 in general fund appropriations in fiscal year 2027 to fund the utilization of temporary contract staff to conduct standardized functional needs assessments for clients of the 3 regional centers? If so, do the committees wish to add the implementation of the standardized functional needs assessments to the letter of intent for the Aging and Disability Services Division and the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy to report to the Interim Finance Committee on their findings and recommendations for transitioning the model to leverage the existing provider network?
Thank you very much, Ms. Ellsworth, and we're going to pause right here and consider that, and I'll accept a motion. Discussion, was that Senator Nguyen? Thank you.
Thank you. I have a quick clarifying question. I know that we made a decision not to fund those 111 new positions. And so I am curious if the costs associated with those are also associated with those new positions, the service costs? Or would the agency have the ability to come to IFC with a work program and get some of that additional service costs?
Just Kimber Ellsworth for the record, just to clarify, the service costs that were approved with the caseload positions, that's a separate activity than what the contract staff would be doing in this decision. So there's no additional service costs except for their time to conduct the assessments in this decision before you. And yes, the agency would have the ability to come to the IFC if additional authority was needed for any of the services.
Thank you. I think that answers my question.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Brown May, did you have a question?
I have a statement and a question, if you don't mind. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity. First, I want, out of an abundance of caution, I want to go on the record as stating that my employer is a jobs and day training provider that does contract with the State Division under some of these budget items that we're considering here today, although one of many 40 or more provider organizations. So I don't benefit by that independently, but want to make sure that we get that on the record. And then these 17 positions that we're talking about then would potentially do the work of case management in order to help us comply with that federal expectation that every person receives an assessment. Is that correct?
Kimber Ellsworth for the record. So the positions would conduct the standardized assessments. They would be the individuals conducting the assessments. Yes.
Thank you very much. And with that, if there are no more questions, I will accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve total funding of $1.3 million, $877,292 of which is general fund appropriations in FY 2027 to fund the utilization of temporary contract staff to conduct standardized functional needs assessments for clients of the 3 regional centers. In addition, to add the implementation of the standardized function needs assessment to the letter of intent for the Aging and Disability Services Division and the Division of Healthcare Finance and Policy to report to the Interim Finance Committee on their findings and recommendations for transitioning the model to leverage the existing provider network.
Thank you very much, Chair Monroe Moreno, and I'll take a second from Senator Nguyen. Is there any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Thank you very much. Motion passes. And Ms. Ellsworth, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next budget is the Consumer Health Assistance Budget Account 3204. The subcommittee recommended approval of $465,448, including $209,452 in general fund appropriations over the 2025 to 27 biennium to establish caseloads and staffing ratios and add 3 associated positions to support consumer health assistance program activities based on March 2025 updated caseload projections, and with budget amendment A2534-43204 to delay 1 position start date from October 2025 to January 2026. For the Early Intervention Services Budget Account 3208, the subcommittee recommended approval of $1.3 million, including $1.2 million general fund appropriations over the 2025 to 27 biennium to adjust caseload service costs for the Early Intervention Services Program based on the March 2025 updated caseload projections. The subcommittee did not recommend approval of new positions for caseload staffing adjustments, resulting in decreased costs of $2.4 million, including $2.1 million general fund savings over the 2025 to 27 biennium compared to the recommendation in the executive budget. The subcommittee did not recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to change the community provider's payment model and instead recommended additional general fund appropriations of $10.9 million in each year of the 2025 to 27 biennium based on the March 2025 caseload projections to maintain the current payment model for early intervention services community providers. The subcommittee also recommended issuing a letter of intent to the Aging and Disability Services Division to report to the Interim Finance Committee during the 2025 to 26 interim on the Early Intervention Services Program's compliance with federal billing rules, as well as the methodology for calculating the state's maintenance of effort baseline and any recommended policy, statutory, or program changes, including a transition plan for any payment model change. The subcommittee also recommended language for inclusion in the 2025 Appropriations Act, directing the legislative auditor to conduct a performance audit of the Early Intervention Services Program, including without limitation an analysis of the program's state and community providers' reimbursements from Medicaid and private insurance, an evaluation of the claims submitted for reimbursement, and an assessment of the adequacy of the program's internal controls. The subcommittee did not recommend approval of the governor's recommendations to utilize opioid settlement funds from the Fund for a Resilient Nevada to fund an add-on payment for the community provider's caseload, or to fund a new unclassified medical epidemiologist position to study the impact of opioids on the newborn population. For the Autism Treatment Assistance Program, budget 3209, the subcommittee recommended approval of $1.5 million, including $1.4 million general fund appropriations over the 2025 to 27 biennium to fund projected caseload changes for the Autism Treatment Assistance Program, including associated service costs and staffing adjustments based on the caseloads as projected in the governor's recommended budget, including 5 new positions, and with budget amendment A253753209 to delay 3 position start dates. For the Home and Community-Based Services, budget account 3266, the subcommittee did not recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to fund projected caseload adjustments for the community-based care programs over the 2025 to 27 biennium, including adjustments to caseload service costs and staffing, and instead recommended maintaining the fiscal year 2025 legislatively approved base caseload and associated staffing levels. The recommendation results in decreased funding of $8.4 million, including $6 million net general fund savings over the 2025 to 27 biennium compared to the funding in the executive budget. The subcommittee also recommended issuing a letter of intent to the Aging and Disability Services Division and the Office of Analytics to evaluate the current community-based care program's caseload, including the methodology for projecting caseload and staffing needs, associated service costs, client wait times, and the approach to service delivery, and to report to the Interim Finance Committee during the 2025 to 26 interim on their findings and recommendations. The subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $424,710 in each year of the 2025 to 27 biennium to fund projected base caseload service costs for the Community Options Program for the Elderly and Personal Assistance Services programs, as recommended by the governor. The subcommittee further recommended approval of additional general fund appropriations of $802,375 in each year of the 2025 to 27 biennium to increase the average monthly cost per individual for the programs based on the agency's most recent cost data. For Adult Protective Services and Long-Term Care Ombudsman, budget account 3282, the subcommittee did not recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to fund projected caseload adjustments for the Adult Protective Services and Long-Term Care Ombudsman programs over the 2025 to 27 biennium, including adjustments to caseload staffing. The recommendations result in decreased funding of $7.9 million, including $5.9 million net general fund savings over the 2025 to 27 biennium compared to the funding in the executive budget. The subcommittee recommended closing the following Aging and Disability Services Division budget accounts as recommended by the governor with or without technical adjustments, and provided authority for fiscal staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary. Tobacco Settlement Program, budget account 3140. Commission for Persons Who Are Deaf, budget account 1006. Senior RX and Disability RX, budget account 3156. Communication Access Services, budget account 3206. Focus and MFP, budget account 3271. Planning, Advocacy, and Community Grants, budget account 3278. And Statewide Independent Living Council, budget account 3283.
Thank you very much. Any questions or discussion on those accounts? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve the Joint Subcommittee on Human Services closing report on the Department of Health and Human Services Aging and Disability Services Division and provide authorization to our fiscal staff to make technical adjustments as needed.
Thank you very much, Chairman Moreno, a second by Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Ellsworth. All right, we will move on to the Division of Child and Family Services. Thank you very much. Welcome, Mr. Miller. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members of the committees. My name is Daniel Miller, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division for the record. Today I will be presenting the closing report on the Division of Child and Family Services. The Joint Subcommittee on Human Services has completed its review of the Division of Child and Family Service budget accounts for the 2025-27 biennium. The closing recommendations of the subcommittee resulted in general fund decreases of $3.7 million in fiscal year 2026 and $6.8 million in fiscal year 2027, as compared to the recommendations in the governor's budget. The following describes the recommendations of the Joint Subcommittee. For the Children, Youth, and Family Administration, budget account 3145, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by Budget Amendment A25493-3145 for a net reduction of $4.7 million, inclusive of $1.1 million of general fund increase and the elimination of $5.9 million in American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds, and a change in funding source to continue funding 7 positions currently funded with ARPA Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds. For the Information Services, budget count 3143, the subcommittee deferred taking action on the governor's recommendation to continue the Unified Nevada Information Technology for Youth, also known as UNITY, replacement project funded with federal Title IV funds of $21 million and a reduction of federal ARPA Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds of $22.5 million over the 2025-27 biennium. The UNITY system is Nevada's federally required comprehensive child welfare information system. It is an electronic child welfare case management tool and stores official case records for all children and families served by child welfare agencies in Nevada. The agency notes that the current UNITY system is a legacy electronic child welfare case management tool built in 2003 and indicates replacing the system would lead to improved accuracy and timeliness in child protective assessments, better family engagement, and data-driven decision-making. At the October 20th, 2022 Interim Finance Committee meeting, $18.4 million of ARPA funds were authorized to begin the project to replace the UNITY system. The agency indicates it expended ARPA funds of $8,555 on software in fiscal year 2023 and $134,739 in fiscal year 2024 for planning costs and projects fiscal year 2025 expenses of $2.1 million on a needs assessment and project management costs for a total of $2.3 million in project expenses from fiscal year 2023 through fiscal year 2025. According to the agency, the total cost of the UNITY replacement project is estimated to be $52.2 million by the time the system is fully implemented in the 27-29 biennium. The agency anticipates the fiscal year 2026 projected expenditures of $21.5 million would be supported by $10.7 million of ARPA funds and $10.7 million of federal Title IV funds. The fiscal year 2027 projected expenditures of $10.8 million would be supported by $5.4 million of ARPA funds and $5.4 million of federal Title IV funds. However, the governor's recommended budget does not include expenditure authority for ARPA funds to support the UNITY replacement project in the 25-27 biennium. During the subcommittee closing on April 22nd, 2025, the subcommittee questioned whether the current UNITY system was federally compliant and expressed the concerns about the agency's ability to fully expend the ARPA funds prior to the December 31st, 2026 federal deadline. The agency testified that the current UNITY system is federally compliant. Additionally, the agency indicated a needs assessment was completed in March of 2025 and that the agency is in the process of finalizing a contract with the vendor to draft the request for proposal, which is expected to be released by September of 2025. Once the request for proposal is released and bids are received and reviewed, the agency would be able to select a vendor and negotiate a contract to begin replacing the current system. The agency anticipates the work on the replacement would begin towards the end of calendar year 2025. In follow-up information provided after the April 22nd, 2025 subcommittee closing, the agency reported that commercial off-the-shelf systems are available, which would need little to no customization in order to implement a basic and functional comprehensive child welfare information system. However, the agency indicates such systems may not meet all federally required categories to qualify for Title IV reimbursement and may not provide all the functionality required by the division. The agency notes that additional features could be added to the system in the future, but each new feature may require the agency to go through the bidding process again. The agency also provided an update indicating that it would be able to fully support the project with ARPA and Title IV-E reimbursements in the 2025-27 biennium, and that no general fund appropriations would be needed until fiscal year 2028. The agency projections that were discussed at the April 22nd, 2025 subcommittee closing reflected the agency's projected expenditures of $21.5 million in fiscal year 27, which included the addition of $5.4 million in general fund appropriations that were not included in the governor's recommended budget. However, information provided by the agency subsequent to the budget closing indicates the agency would no longer need the additional $5.4 million general fund appropriation in fiscal year 2027, since the updated projected expenditure in fiscal year 2027 is $10.8 million, which would be funded with a combination of ARPA funds and federal Title IV-E funds. If the committees wish to approve the continued funding for the Unity Replacement Project in the 2025-27 biennium, the following technical adjustments should be considered. For fiscal year 2026, increase Title IV-E authority from $10.5 million to $10.7 million and add remaining available ARPA funding authority of $10.7 million. For fiscal year 27, decrease federal Title IV-E authority from $10.5 million to $5.4 million and add remaining available ARPA funding authority of $5.4 million. If the committees wish to approve continued funding for the Unity Replacement Project in order to monitor the project implementation, the committees may wish to consider issuing a letter of intent to receive semi-annual updates on the project, including the following information: an update on the replacement of the Unity system implementation plan and projected timelines, an overview of the activities of related contract positions and project vendors, a list of project deliverables received, deliverables anticipated for the next reporting period, and deliverables that are behind schedule, an overview of any identified deviations from the original project plan, scope, implementation timeline, and costs, and a discussion of factors contributing to any deviations, and a summary of categorical expenditures incurred to date on projected implementation and cost projections for the remainder of the project implementation. Alternatively, if the committees do not wish to approve funding for the Unity Replacement Project, the projected remaining ARPA funding of $16.1 million could be redirected to one or more other existing eligible projects that have been previously approved to be supported by ARPA. The decision for the committees can be found on page 6 of your packet. Do the committees wish to approve the governor's recommendation to continue funding the Unity Replacement Project in the 2025-27 biennium, inclusive of the noted technical adjustments to federal Title IV-E authority, and authorize ARPA funds to align with the agency's projections, resulting in authorized ARPA funds of $16.1 million and federal Title IV-E authority of $16.1 million over the 2025-27 biennium? And do the subcommittees wish to issue a letter of intent instructing the Division of Child and Family Services to report semi-annually to the IFC on the status of the replacement of the division's Unity system?
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Any discussion or questions on this? I'll go to Senator Wynn.
I guess more of a statement. I'm just incredibly frustrated that during the process of updating and modernizing this Unity system that we actually have to have for federal purposes, that we are now in a position, we are on a super tight deadline to be able to even utilize these funds. So I guess this is more to the agency regarding this, hoping that what they represent, that this is going to be able to be implemented in time and we're going to be able to utilize those ARPA funds, and that we haven't just entered into yet another ongoing decade-long expansion into a modernization IT project. I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but I think given the alternative that we have this late in the game to be able to come up with a different, more inexpensive program, I think is also not feasible. So I think I'm just frustrated, and I'm sure you'll feel the frustration from other committee members that we are even in this position. So more of a comment. Thank you, Chair, for that opportunity.
Thank you very much. And I believe Chairman Moreno has comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I too am frustrated. We heard during the presentation from the division that there wasn't an off-the-shelf version that could help us with this Unity system that federally we have to have. But then after the meeting, heard from a number of vendors that do have something that's more off the shelf. I feel like the program that we're creating is more like a Cadillac version that as soon as it's finished, it's going to be outdated and it's going to cost us more money. I hate IT projects with this state. They seem like they take forever and they end up costing us 2, 3, sometimes 10 times the amount of money. I kind of feel like we're between a rock and a hard place. I would love to be able to start again from scratch, but I just don't think we have that time. We have limited time to use the ARPA funds. And it would take too long, I believe, my opinion, to go out for an RFP. So to the division, we have to get this done with these dollars in the time frame that you have put on the record that you can do it. It's very frustrating to be in this position today, but no question, just a comment, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Any additional comments? And I would just echo what my colleagues have said. My concern is we're doing this with ARPA funding, and will we get through all this and be able to maintain the ARPA funding before somebody pulls it or it's done being used? We have a deadline. So I too am concerned. But with that, if I see no more questions or discussion, Madam Assembly Member, I would accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With that discussion, I move to approve the governor's recommendation to continue funding for the Unity Replacement Project in the 25-27 biennium, inclusive of the noted technical adjustments to the federal Title 5E authority, and authorize ARPA funds to align with the agency's projections, resulting in authorized ARPA funds of $16.1 million and federal authority of $16.1 million over the 25-27 biennium, and issue a letter of intent instructing the Division of Child and Family Services to report semi-annually to the IFC on the status of the replacement and the division's Unity system.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member Monroe Moreno. A second from Senator Wynn. Any discussion on this motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much. And please go ahead, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Daniel Miller for the record. For the Washoe County Child Welfare Budget Count 3141, the subcommittee recommended approval of an additional $85,500 over the 2025-27 biennium to increase the non-recurring legal counsel fees from $500 to $1,000 per case in this budget account, which was not included in the executive budget. To implement the Extended Young Adult Support Services Program, the subcommittee recommended approval of $3.2 million over the 2025-27 biennium, inclusive of caseload updates provided by the agency, which resulted in a net increase of $735,759 over the 2025-27 biennium when compared to the governor's recommended budget. However, the subcommittee recommended $894,190 of opioid settlement funds transferred from the Fund for a Resilient Nevada over the 2025-27 biennium instead of general fund appropriations as recommended by the governor. In addition, the subcommittee recommended issuing a letter of intent instructing the agency to provide annual updates on the implementation of the Extended Young Adult Support Services Program in all 3 child welfare budget accounts to the IFC. The subcommittee recommended approval of $410,000 over the 2025-27 biennium to support additional transportation for youth foster care in Washoe County, as recommended by the governor. For the Clark County Child Welfare Budget Account 3142, in alignment with actions taken in Washoe County Child Welfare Budget Account, the subcommittee recommended approval of an additional $142,500 over the 2025-27 biennium to increase the non-recurring legal counsel fees from $500 to $1,000 per case in this budget account, which was not included in the executive budget. To implement the Extended Young Adult Support Services Program, the subcommittee recommended approval of $17 million over the 2025-27 biennium, inclusive of caseload updates provided by the agency, which results in a net increase of $9.3 million over the 2025-27 biennium when compared to the governor's recommended budget. However, the subcommittee recommended $4.7 million of opioid settlement funds transferred from the Fund for a Resilient Nevada over the 2025-27 biennium instead of general fund appropriations as recommended by the governor. In addition, the subcommittee recommended issuing a letter of intent instructing the agency to provide annual updates on the implementation of the Extended Young Adult Support Services Program in this budget account as well. To align with the actions taken by the subcommittee to provide funding for the youth transportation and other child welfare budget accounts, the subcommittee recommended approval of an additional $498,000, inclusive of $410,850 of general fund in each year of the 2025-27 biennium to support additional transportation for youth in foster care in Clark County, which was not included in the executive budget. For the Rural Child Welfare Budget Account 3229, in alignment with actions taken in the other two child welfare budget accounts, the subcommittee recommended approval of an additional $64,000 over the 25-27 biennium to increase the non-recurring legal counsel fees from $500 to $1,000 per case in this budget account, which was not included in the executive budget. To implement the Extended Young Adult Support Services Program, the subcommittee recommended approval of $2.6 million over the 2025-27 biennium, inclusive of the caseload updates provided by the agency, which results in a net increase of $468,781 over the 25-27 biennium when compared to the governor's recommended budget. However, the subcommittee recommended $722,615 of opioid settlement funds transferred from the Fund for a Resilient Nevada over the 2025-27 biennium, instead of general fund appropriations as recommended by the governor. In addition, the subcommittee recommended approval of a reduction in general fund appropriations of $682,908 over the 25-27 biennium to remove funding supporting the court jurisdiction program in the Rural Child Welfare Budget Account, since the Extended Young Adult Support Services Program would replace the court jurisdiction program. Finally, the subcommittee recommended issuing a letter of intent instructing the agency to provide annual updates on the implementation of the Extended Young Adult Support Services Program in this budget account as well. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to implement the Family First Prevention Services Act plan, funded with $2.7 million and inclusive of opioid settlement funds of $1.4 million and federal Title IV prevention funds of $1.4 million over the 25-27 biennium. For the Child Welfare Trust budget account 3242, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by budget amendment A253-883242 to eliminate transfers of $97,153 to the Rural Child Welfare budget account in each year of the 2025-27 biennium, and instead increase reserves by the same amount to eliminate deductions for the cost of care that are currently deducted from the Children's State Managed Trust Fund accounts. For the Juvenile Justice Service budget account 1383, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer 11 mental health counselor positions and 1 substance abuse counselor position and general fund appropriations of $3.2 million over the 25-27 biennium to the Southern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services budget account. For the Family Support Program budget account 3146, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by budget amendments A25354-3146 and A25764-3146, and with technical adjustments to add 4 existing positions to the base budget, correct the funding source for 2 positions, and remove 2 ARPA-funded positions from the base budget for a net reduction in funding of $1.3 million, inclusive of a $345,903 general fund increase over the 2025-27 biennium. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by budget amendment A253-543-146, and with technical adjustments to implement the Family First Prevention Services Act plan, funded with $301,461 in fiscal year 2027. For the Youth Alternative Placement budget account 3147, the subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $398,849 in each year of the 25-27 biennium, and elimination of $398,849 of ARPA funding in each year of the 25-27 biennium, as recommended by the governor, which would maintain the current funding levels at the China Spring and Aurora Pines youth camps. In addition, the subcommittee recommended additional funding not included in the executive budget of $2.7 million, inclusive of $1.9 million in general fund and $884,182 in county assessments, to allow for the continued operation of the China Spring and Aurora Pines youth camps at their current census in the 25-27 biennium. Further, the subcommittee recommended issuing a letter of intent for the Douglas County camps to work with the Division of Child and Family Services to identify other funding sources to support the China Spring and Aurora Pines youth camps. For the Summit View Youth Center budget count 3148, the subcommittee recommended not approving the governor's recommendation of $12.1 million over the 25-27 biennium to develop a new intake assessment center. For the Youth Parole Services budget account 3263, The subcommittee recommended approval of $704,737 in each year of the 25-27 biennium, with technical adjustments to support an increase in contract expenditures for transitional community reintegration, behavioral support, and mental health services as recommended by the governor. For the Northern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services Budget Account 3281, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation of a net reduction in funding of $435,508, inclusive of $278,773 of general fund, over the 2025-27 biennium to eliminate 3 positions and fund 1 contract position. For the Southern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services Budget Account 3646, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by Budget Amendment A253553646 for net reductions of $430,860 over the 2025-27 biennium for the elimination of 23 positions and the addition of approximately 21 contract positions. In addition, the subcommittee recommended approval to transfer 1 psychiatric casework position to the Youth Parole Services budget account and to transfer 1 psychiatric caseworker and 1 clinical program manager position to the Northern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services budget account, with a total reduction in funding in this budget account of $694,548 over the 2025-27 biennium as recommended by the governor. For the Victims of Crime budget account 4895, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by Budget Amendment A254764895 and with technical adjustments for net general fund reductions of $107,233 over the 25-27 biennium to transition from outsourcing the processing of victims of crime compensation claims to providing those services internally, with the addition of 3 new positions and a new online payment management and application system. In addition, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation of $1.2 million in general fund appropriations over the 25-27 biennium and the elimination of $874,420 of ARPA funding to support victims of crimes benefits. Finally, the subcommittee recommended closing the following division of Child and Family Service budget accounts as recommended by the governor with or without technical adjustments. Victim Services budget account 4894. Victims of Domestic Violence budget account 3181. Children's Trust account budget account 3201. Transition from Foster Care budget account 3250. Review of Death of Children budget account 3251. Caliente Youth Center budget account 3179. Nevada Youth Training Center budget account 3259. The subcommittee provided fiscal staff with authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
And thank you so much for all of that information. Are there any questions about this and these budgets? With that, I will accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve the Joint Subcommittee on Human Services closing report on the Division of Child and Family Services and provide fiscal staff the authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Monroe Moreno, second by Senator Wynn. Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much. All right, we will now go to the Department of Corrections. All right, thank you very much. And Ms. Morris, please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nancy Morris from the Fiscal Analysis Division. Today, I will be presenting the Joint Subcommittee on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation closing report for the Department of Corrections. The Joint Subcommittee on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation has completed its review of the Department of Corrections, or NDOC, budget accounts for the 2025-27 biennium. The closing recommendations of the subcommittee resulted in additional general fund appropriations of $12.1 million in fiscal year 2026 and $14.4 million in fiscal year 2027. The following comments describe the more significant recommendations of the joint subcommittee. The executive budget provided funding to house an average of 10,739 offenders in fiscal year 2026 and 10,970 offenders in fiscal year 2027, based on offender population projections received from the JFA Institute in March 2024. The subcommittee recommended funding to house an average of 10,794 offenders, an increase of 55, in fiscal year 2026, and 11,031 offenders, an increase of 61, in fiscal year 2027, based on revised offender population projections updated in March 2025, which is an increase of 593 offenders in fiscal year 2026 and 830 offenders in fiscal year 2027, as compared to the fiscal year 2024 average actual offender population of 10,201. For the department overview, the subcommittee recommended approval of adjustments to average annual offender population caseloads as included in the executive budget, which updated offender-driven expenditures at each institution and the offender store fund and the inmate welfare account, and resulted in net increases in general fund appropriations of $3.3 million and $247,069 in other funds over the 2025-27 biennium. To improve the department's grievance process, the subcommittee recommended approval of $1.1 million over the 2025-27 biennium for 6 new positions, 2 each at Northern Nevada Correctional Center, Southern Desert Correctional Center, and Ely State Prison, as recommended by the governor. In addition, the subcommittee recommended approval of 14 budget amendments for inflationary utilities expenses in various NDOC budget accounts funded with general fund appropriations totaling $2.9 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium. To address the NDOC's ongoing issues related to overtime expenses associated with staffing, as discussed at the April 3rd, 2025 Interim Finance Committee meeting, the subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations totaling $41.2 million that was not included in the executive budget. The subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $16.1 million to add 47 positions for the Central Transportation Unit and 10 positions each at Lovelock Correctional Center and Ely State Prison. In addition, the subcommittee recommended approval of the creation of a new budget account for the NDOC Training Academy, Budget Account 3712, which includes 23 new positions for Training Academy staff, totaling general fund appropriations of $6.5 million over the 2025-27 biennium. The subcommittee also recommended general fund appropriations of $18.7 million over the 2025-27 biennium to establish 90 new positions in the new budget account for correctional officer trainee positions for trainees in the academy. Upon the completion of training, the trainees would be transitioned to positions in facility budgets. The subcommittee further recommended that existing positions and expenses related to the training academy be transferred to the new budget account. In addition, the subcommittee recommended the new budget account be excluded from the provisions in the Appropriations Act, which allow the NDOC to transfer funds amongst NDOC budget accounts. Finally, the subcommittee recommended issuing a letter of intent for the NDOC to report quarterly regarding its overtime expenses. In the Director's Office, Budget Account 3710, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation as included in the executive budget for general fund appropriations of $1 million over the 25-27 biennium for a new case management tool. In addition, the subcommittee recommended to include State Criminal Alien Assistance Program grant funds of $2 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium, with an equal reduction in general fund appropriations. Prison Medical Care, Budget Account 3706, the subcommittee recommended general fund appropriations of $10.1 million over the 2025-27 biennium to fund adjustments to the offender-driven medical care costs based on inflation and updated offender population projections. In addition, the subcommittee recommended approval of Budget Amendment A251923706 to continue transfers from the Inmate Welfare Account budget account of $2.3 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium, and eliminate the governor's recommendation for general fund appropriations of $2.3 million in each year. In the Correctional Programs Budget Account 3711, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for transfers of opioid settlement funds of $180,250 over the 2025-27 biennium from the Department of Health and Human Services Fund for a Resilient Nevada budget account to support one new substance abuse counselor position. In the Southern Desert Correctional Center budget account 3738, to establish 2 new correctional emergency response team shifts, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by Budget Amendment A253723738 to add 34 positions, funded with general fund appropriations of $5.9 million over the 25-27 biennium. Warm Springs Correctional Center, Budget Account 3716, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by Budget Amendment A256123716 to correct the positions in the base budget and the transfer of 2 positions and general fund appropriations of $506,448 over the 2025-27 biennium to the Director's Office budget account. In the Wells Conservation Camp budget account 3739, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer general fund appropriations of $2 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium, along with associated costs for positions, vehicles, and offender-driven expenses, as aligned with the offender population projections in the institutions and facilities receiving the transferred offenders, and to close Wells Conservation Camp. In the Humboldt Conservation Camp budget account 3741, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by Budget Amendment A255333741 as adjusted to effectively offset the governor's original recommendation and eliminate previously eliminated positions in the base budget and the transfers of the positions. In the Tonopah Conservation Camp budget account 3754, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation as amended by Budget Amendment A255423754 as adjusted to effectively offset the governor's original recommendation and eliminate previously eliminated positions in the base budget and the transfers of the positions. In the Offender Store Fund budget account 3708, the subcommittee recommended not approving the governor's recommendation to transfer a total of $600,000 of retained earnings to the prison industry and prison ranch budget accounts in fiscal year 2026. In addition, the subcommittee recommended approval of Budget Amendment A252013708 to increase transfers of store sales revenue from the Offender Store Fund budget account to the Inmate Welfare account by $2.3 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium. The subcommittee also recommended not approving the governor's recommendation to transfer 20 positions from the Offender Store Fund budget account to the Director's Office budget account, where the funding source of the positions would have changed to new general fund appropriations of $2 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium. In the Inmate Welfare budget account, in the Inmate Welfare account budget account 3763, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer 16 positions from the Inmate Welfare account to the Correctional Programs budget account and change the funding source of the positions to general fund appropriations of $1.7 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium. In the prison industry budget account 3719, to improve the solvency of this budget account, the subcommittee recommended approval of one-time general fund appropriations of $250,000 in fiscal year 2026 instead of the governor's recommendation for a transfer from the offender store fund budget account. In addition, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to eliminate 4 vacant positions, resulting in savings of $824,535 over the 2025-27 biennium. Further, the subcommittee recommended issuing a letter of intent for the NDOC to report semi-annually on the steps it is taking to ensure the prison industry budget account remains solvent through the 2025-27 biennium. Prison Ranch Budget Account 3727. To improve the solvency of this budget account, the subcommittee recommended approval of one-time general fund appropriations of $350,000 in fiscal year 2026 instead of the governor's recommendation for a transfer from the offender store fund budget account. In addition, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for reductions in dairy and wild horse program-related supply expenses totaling $475,000 over the 2025-27 biennium. Finally, the subcommittee recommended closing the following Department of Corrections budget accounts as included in the executive budget, inclusive of actions on budget amendments as noted in the documents for the budget accounts and consistent with the subcommittee's closing actions taken with the Department of Corrections overview closing with technical or no adjustments. Ely State Prison 3751, High Desert State Prison 3762, Northern Nevada Correctional Center 3717, Nevada State Prison 3718, Lovelock Correctional Center 3759, Southern Nevada Correctional Center 3715, Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center 3761, Casa Grande Transitional Housing 3760, Northern Nevada Transitional Housing 3724, Stewart Conservation Camp 3722, Pioche Conservation Camp 3723, Three Lakes Valley Conservation Camp 3725, Ely Conservation Camp 3747, Jean Conservation Camp 3748, Silver Springs Conservation Camp 3749, and Carlin Conservation Camp 3752. The subcommittee provided fiscal staff with authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary. And that concludes the subcommittee report.
Thank you so much. Any questions, comments about this or these budgets? Not seeing any, I'll take a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve the Joint Subcommittee on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation closing report on the Department of Corrections and provide staff with the authority to make technical changes and adjustments as needed.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Monroe Moreno, second by Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much, Ms. Morris. And we will go on. All right, our next division will be State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and we'll start with the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources bond. Do the program first.
Do you have the, which one, we're doing the department?
All right. The State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, it's the one we're going to be doing. Mr. Leiser, this is going to be a resume catcher for you for the rest of your life. You see what happens around here after we sit here for 3 or 4 hours? Thank you, Mr. Leiser, for the added relief. All right, please go ahead when you are ready, Mr. Luna and Mr. Nichols.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Justin Luna for the record, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. Good morning, members of the committees. I'm joined by, as you mentioned, Mr. Nichols, my colleague. We share DCNR, and he's here to support if there are any questions on forestry or environmental protection. So we'll get started with the program. Subcommittee closing report from the Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation Subcommittee. The Joint Subcommittee on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation completed its review of the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, or DCNR, if I may, budget recommendations for the 2025-27 biennium. The closing recommendations of the subcommittee resulted in additional general fund appropriations of $3.7 million in fiscal year 2026 and $3.5 million in fiscal year 2027. When compared to the governor's recommended budget. The following comments describe the more significant recommendations of the subcommittee. Administration budget 4150, subcommittee recommended approval of the centralization of department IT staff within the DCNR Director's Office by transferring 23 existing IT-related positions from other DCNR divisions, reclassifying 4 of the transferred positions, and adding 3 new IT-related positions funded with cost allocation revenue of $7.1 million over the 2025-27 biennium. Subcommittee recommended issuing a letter of intent requiring the agency to report to the Interim Finance Committee, or IFC, by July 1st, 2026 on the effect of the IT centralization on operational efficiencies, including any improvements in overall IT services department-wide, unanticipated challenges encountered, and staff time tracking to ensure an appropriate cost allocation methodology is being used. Subcommittee also recommended approval of Director's Office cost allocation revenue of $134,282 over the 2025-27 biennium for 1 new personnel technician position as recommended by the governor. Water Conservation and Infrastructure Budget Account 4159. Subcommittee recommended approval of reductions in Federal American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds of $29.2 million in fiscal year 2026 and $29.3 million in fiscal year 2027 to reflect the expiration of the federal funding and project subawards based on projected grant authority. Subcommittee also recommended continuing 1 administrative services officer position by transferring the position to the DCNR Director's Office effective April 1st, 2027, and eliminating 1 management analyst position effective March 31st, 2027, which are both currently supported by this federal funding. Conservation Districts Program, Budget Account 4151. Subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation of general fund appropriations of $14,000 in each year of the 2025-27 biennium to increase the total annual funding provided to each of the 28 conservation districts by $500 from $5,000 to $5,500 per fiscal year. State Parks Budget Account 4162. Subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $752,146 over the 2025-27 biennium to add 1 new commission park supervisor position and 2 new commission park ranger positions in fiscal year 2026 and 2 additional commission park ranger positions in fiscal year 2027. Subcommittee also recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $244,154 over the 2025-27 biennium for 1 new administrative services officer position to provide additional fiscal support for the agency. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $308,424 over the 2025-27 biennium to lease dashboard cameras and body-worn cameras for use by the division's law enforcement staff. The subcommittee recommended approval of reductions in federal ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds totaling $558,617 over the 2025-27 biennium to reflect the elimination of federal funding support for the reservation system and related costs, including one management analyst effective July 1st, 2025. To continue support for the reservation system over the 2025-27 biennium, general fund appropriations totaling $350,000 in reservation system fees, revenue totaling $208,617 for vendor costs and one management analyst position is recommended. Subcommittee also recommends directing the agency to request continued funding in the 2027-29 biennium through an enhancement decision unit and issuing a letter of intent requesting the agency submit a report to the IFC by July 1st, 2026. That includes a status update on the reservation system with further direction for the division to include an analysis on the planned ongoing self-sufficiency of the reservation system fee structure. Water Resources Budget Account 4171, Subcommittee recommended approval of reductions in federal ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds totaling $1.9 million over the 2025-27 biennium, providing revenue authority of $2.4 million over the 2025-27 biennium for the project to update water availability estimates throughout the state, and $458,420 over the 2025-27 biennium to fund one management analyst position, one administrative assistant position, and contract services for the project to digitize the division's records through December 31st, 2026. Due to the expiration of the federal funds and general fund appropriations of $110,895 in fiscal year 2027 to continue the two positions, with direction to the agency that the continuation of the positions be considered one-time and requested through an enhancement decision unit for the 2027-29 biennium. Subcommittee also recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $113,235 over the 2025-27 biennium to reclassify a classified supervisor professional engineer position to an unclassified administrative law judge position to support administrative hearings. Forestry Budget Account 4195. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for $100,000 in protected plant permitting fee revenues in each year of the 2025-27 biennium for various projects associated with the preservation and endangered and threatened plant species. To provide the agency with the authority to retain these fee revenues, subcommittee also recommended a bill draft be requested by one of the money committees to amend statute accordingly. Subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for rental revenue of $43,200 in each year of the 2025-27 biennium to allow the agency to charge rent to employees who reside in agency-owned housing. To allow the agency to retain this rental revenue and allow the agency to lease residences to employees on discretionary basis, subcommittee also recommended a bill draft be requested by one of the money committees to amend statute accordingly. Finally, subcommittee recommended approval of 3 new positions effective July 1st, 2025 for the agency's incident billing unit, which is responsible for the preparation and review of billing invoices for fire incidents. This recommendation was not included in the governor's recommended budget, but was recommended by the subcommittee to increase staffing in the unit and to address issues in the billing processes identified in the Legislative Council Bureau LCB Audit Division's January 2025 audit report, LA 2604. Costs associated with the position totals Costs associated with the positions total $471,449 in fiscal year 2026 and $462,955 in fiscal year 2027 and would be funded through the transfer of reimbursement revenues for fire suppression efforts. In recommending these new positions, the subcommittee also recommended the issuance of a letter of intent establishing that the cost of these new positions, as well as the existing costs associated with the incident billing unit, be allocated across in-state and out-of-state reimbursement revenues. Forestry Fire Suppression Budget Account 4196. Subcommittee recommended approval of technical adjustments to align revenue and expenditure authority to reflect the 5-year average of reimbursement revenues and certain expenditures as adjusted to remove costs supported by one-time funding. These technical adjustments result in a net decrease in general fund appropriations totaling $737,919 in fiscal year 2026 and $705,032 in fiscal year 2027. Additionally, to address recommendations included in LCB Audit Division Report LA 2604 related to the transparency of in-state and out-of-state fire incident response costs and reimbursements, Subcommittee recommended the creation of a new out-of-state fire suppression budget account 4193, to isolate revenues and expenditures associated with out-of-state incidents. To establish the out-of-state fire suppression budget account, Subcommittee recommended one of the Money Committee's request a bill draft to create the budget account in statute. As recommended by the Subcommittee, the budget account would be a non-reverting, interest-earning budget account and be authorized to receive general fund advances upon approval by the Director of the Governor's Finance Office. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended a general fund appropriation of $100 in each year of the 2025-27 biennium for the new budget account to allow the agency to request allocations from the IFC contingency account as a last resort if no other funding is available. To provide beginning cash for the new budget account, Subcommittee recommended the bill draft establishing the budget account also include a one-time general fund appropriation of $10 million. Subcommittee also recommended $32 million of Subcommittee also recommended $32 million in out-of-state fire incident response reimbursement revenue in each fiscal year. In addition, to reduce the need for one-time funding during the 2025-27 biennium, Subcommittee recommended additional general fund appropriation of $5 million in each year of the 2025-27 biennium for the existing fire suppression budget account to provide additional funding for costs associated with in-state incidents. Finally, Subcommittee recommended the issuance of a letter of intent establishing a semi-annual reporting requirement to the IFC regarding the amounts owed to and by the state for fire incident responses, as well as updates on the agency's efforts to comply with the LCB audit report. Subcommittee recommended closing the following State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources budget accounts as recommended in the executive budget, with or without technical adjustments. Office of Historic Preservation, budget account 4205. Historic Preservation Comstock Historic District, budget account 5030. Account to restore the sagebrush ecosystem, budget account 4156. Environmental Quality Improvement, 4160. Account for off-highway vehicles, 4285. Forestry Conservation Camps, 4198. Forestry Nurseries, 4235. Nevada Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, 4166. State Lands, 4173. Nevada Natural Heritage, 4101. NDEP Environmental Protection Administration, 3173. DEP Industrial Site Cleanup, 3175. DEP Air Quality, 3185. DEP Water Pollution Control, 3186. DEP Materials Management and Corrective Action, 3187. DEP Mining Regulation Reclamation, 3188. DEP State Revolving Fund Administration, 3189. DEP Water Quality Planning, 3193. DEP Safe Drinking Water Program, 3197. DEP State Environmental Commission, 4149. DEP Water Planning Capital Improvement, 4155. Division of Outdoor Recreation, 4180. Subcommittee also recommended approving technical adjustments noted by fiscal staff and authorized staff to make other technical adjustments to the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources budget accounts as needed. That concludes my report.
Thank you very much. And with that being done, are there any questions for this particular item? I believe Chair Monroe Moreno has a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members of this committee know that once we're in IFC, time and time again, we are presented with a request from forestry for additional monies for fire suppression, whether it's in-state or out-of-state. But also during those IFC meetings and during this session, we've learned that a number of bills had not been, that were monies owed to the state had not been asked for from other states. So in an attempt to correct that, or at least aid in the correction of it, you heard in the report from the subcommittee the establishment of an out-of-state fire suppression budget account to make a distinct line between monies owed to other states for fire suppression and money owed to us, so we can keep a clean line there. And you're also seeing that it's going to cost us some money to do that, because sometimes you have to pay money up front to make things more efficient. And that would be that $32 million in out-of-state fire incident response reimbursement revenue to be put into that fund, so that when bills are owed to us, we can pay them in a timely, bills that we owe, we can pay in a timely manner, but also bills that are coming in, the money owed to us, it will go in that fund, and we'll know from here moving on. And it is a change for the forestry department of how they do things, but I think in the long run, it's going to be easier, not just for the fiscal staff here at the legislature, but also for the forestry division, and we'll have a better idea of the money that's owed to the state of Nevada from other states. So that will require a BDR, and I will be, as the chair of Ways and Means, willing to put in for that BDR and instruct staff to do that, Madam Chair. And I'm ready to make a motion if you're ready.
Please go ahead.
With that, Madam Chair, I move to approve the Joint Subcommittee on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation closing report for the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, their closing report, and to afford our fiscal staff the authority to make any technical adjustments as needed for this account.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Second from Senator Wynn. Any discussion on this motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. And we will go on to the Conservation and Natural Resources Bond Programs. Okay, go ahead, please, when you're ready.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, members of the committees, Justin Luna for the record, and I'll continue. Also want to say thank you to Mr. Nichols for supporting me on that last piece. For this piece of the DCNR is the closing report from the Subcommittee on K-12, Higher Education, and CIP on the general obligation bond programs that are managed through DCNR. The Joint Subcommittee on K-12, Higher Education, CIP completed its review of the general obligation bond programs for the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, DCNR, for the 2025-27 biennium. The closing recommendations of the subcommittee result in general obligation bond issuances of $113.8 million over the 2025-27 biennium. Following comments describe the recommendations of the Joint Subcommittee. Conservation Bond Program. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommended issuances of general obligation bonds of $63.4 million over the 2025-27 biennium for the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources Conservation Bond Program. Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program. Subcommittee recommended approval of the issuances of general obligation bonds totaling $10.5 million over the 2025-27 biennium for the Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program based on the revised plan identified by the DCNR Division of State Lands, contingent upon the passage and approval of Senate Bill 83 or other enabling legislation. Cultural Centers and Historic Preservation Grant Program. Subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommended issuances of general obligation bonds of $3 million in each fiscal year of the 2025-27 biennium for the Cultural Centers and Historic Preservation Grant Program. Water Infrastructure Grant Program. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommended issuances of general obligation bonds, $33.9 million over the 2025-27 biennium for the Water Infrastructure Grant Program. That concludes my presentation of the closing report.
Okay, are there any questions about this particular item? Not seeing any. All those, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve the Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education CIP closing report on the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources General Obligation Bonds Program and afford fiscal staff the authority to make any technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Monroe Moreno, second by Senator Wynn. Any discussion on this motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. All right, we are at a point of pausing. We have left the Treasurer's Office, the Department of Ed, and the Department of Public Safety, and the Department of Public Transportation. So we are going to recess at this point, go to the houses and do our business. And we will be back at the call of the chair. I wished I could tell you exactly what time, but we have some other committees, et cetera, that we might need to do. So we will try to give you all ample warning. And unless anybody has a comment with that, we stand in recess.